So good afternoon and welcome to today's post agenda on the Controller's Report on Procurement Waivers. If the Controller's Office would come forward, maybe you all can take the first 3 seats, and then if the administration, Director Pollock, Ms. Jennifer, if you would take the next 2 seats. Yeah, please. As members are aware, the Controller's Office recently released a report on procurement waivers. It was an informal report, so there wasn't necessarily a formal opportunity for the administration to also sort of weigh in on those waivers. And so the goal here really today is just have a conversation about the sort of recommendations that came out of that report. And so what I would like to do is offer the first round to the Controller to sort of highlight anything that she felt necessary from the report, maybe highlight some of the recommendations she found. And then after that, we'll turn it over to Director Pollock and to have any response necessary. Then we'll open it up for a conversation. Controller Heiser?
Is this on?
Now it's on.
Thank you. I'd like to just, I have 2 colleagues here with me today. Mike Brose is our contracts manager, and Andrew DeWitt is a special projects manager in the City Controller's Office. So late last year, we were asked by council to review the city's waiver process and procurement processes. This was not an audit, it was a report. Audits are much lengthier in time to produce. This was done just to get city council some answers. We did do a formal audit which reviewed years 2016, 2017, and 2018 and was released in 2019 of the procurement process within the city of Pittsburgh. So many of our finding, or many of the things that we highlighted in this report that was we shared with council last month was were previously found to be things that city council should work with in that 2019 audit. That includes we would encourage council to clarify legal citation and definitions pertaining to RFP, quote, confidentiality provisions, address concerns about over-centralized and concentrated control in the current bid and procurement process, and then improve internal functioning and public integrity to enhance transparency and ensure fair competition in the allocation of public funds and resources. And then consider returning some bid and contracting process oversight duties to the City Controller's Office. Those were changes that were all done in the last 10 years. And again, they were formal findings in our 2019 audit. And they, again, in this report came out as suggestions for things that council could work with OMB and the Controller's Office to address some of the concerns with over-centralized responsibilities within OMB. I'm happy to answer further questions. I don't want to just offer a diatribe, but or turn it over to OMB. And if my colleagues, Mike or Andrew, have anything they'd like to add, I'd welcome that now too.
No, that's all right. For now, sure.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Director Pollock.
Thank you, Council President. We prepared some slides just to illustrate our reactions to some of the content in the report, most of which, particularly the findings or the establishment of the facts, we completely agree with. By the way, I'm joined today by Chief Procurement Officer Jen Olzinger, who leads the procurement office within OMB and so is primarily responsible for the management and implementation of the procurement process. With regard to the report, we have just some general responses to information contained in the report, some responses to a few specific findings, and then responses or comments on the recommendations. In terms of general responses, I'll turn it over actually to Jen just to speak to a clarification here.
Sure. This is just a general clarification on the section in the middle on some additional terminology. From conversations on competitive bidding. I just wanted to note that there's a note there on the MRO operations. I'm not sure what they mean by not part of the process, but I wanted to ensure council and our constituents that the MRO items are in fact procured through the invitation for bid process. So I just may have misunderstood the reference there, but I just wanted to note that and clarify that for everyone. In addition to the invitation to qualify, these are general notes, but the IT contracts and the way that those are managed are much more expansive and very specific than is noted in here. And I have a link to that section of code for council to refer to. I didn't feel the need to put the whole section of code in here on the slides, but they're much more restricted than is noted here for those on-call vendors.
As relates to some of the specific findings in the report, regarding most common exceptions from competitive selection, our records indicate that the most common rationale given in a waiver is continuation of services, which does not appear on the list here unless that's what's referenced by emergency professional service contracts. What we would classify as emergency waivers are fairly uncommon, and typically in genuine emergency circumstances that those would likely be accompanied by an emergency declaration, in which case we're not utilizing the waiver process, I don't believe, or are we?
We still do.
Okay, so we still do document a waiver at that point. So there would be an emergency waiver in that instance, but continuation of services, meaning, for example, with technology contracts, as there's been some recent discussion, right, about the difficulty in transitioning from one platform to another, the longer term necessary to get sort of full advantage of those types of contracts. We see continuation of service waivers frequently in that area of expenditure, and in fact are working on legislation to propose to council creating particular structures for technology contracts that would allow us to avoid the waiver by having longer authorized terms for that type of contract, solely in recognition of the challenges presented by long lead time and setup time. But that will be a conversation for either later this year or next year. Sole source professional service contracts are less common than single source contracts, which aren't mentioned here specifically. And Jen, could you just review the difference?
Yeah, I think a lot of people refer to sole source more globally than it is, but in the code it's very specifically defined what a sole source is and what a single source is. So a sole source is something that is proprietary or can only be obtained from one place. A single source is defined as there's maybe only one company that is even willing to contract with us, or there's only one product that suits a very specific need for the city. One example of that would be if we need something to integrate with another piece of software, that software that we have, let's say Computronics, if there's a module that it needs to attach to, it may only have an integration with one specific company, and we've had that case before. So that's the difference between those two, and folks tend to lump them together.
So I think the underlying point here is not in dispute, but just wanted to make that clarification. Regarding the changes sorry, I can't see the whole screen right now. Regarding the changes in code about authorization of waivers and the change to the it had previously been with the city solicitor who authorized those. That was then changed to OMB in 2020, has since been changed again late last year. We would just note for the record that the law department is a source of a significant number of waiver requests. So OMB was supportive of the process in which OMB signed off on the waiver request because, relatively speaking, we enter into fewer contracts and have fewer waiver requests, so it added an additional layer of sort of checks and balances. But the present system, which now requires sign-off from both entities on the form, is addressing that. So. Regarding the requirement that there be an exemptions policy, the 2023, I'm sorry, Jen, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. The amendment in 2023 of the code changes required that the Office of Management and Budget maintain a policy for waivers of the competitive process. for some reason, I'm not sure why the controller did not have a copy of that, but I just wanted to note that we had had a policy in place since 2017 prior to the code requirement of having it. That policy was posted on the OMB intranet page that all city employees have access to and filed with the city clerk. And we have recently updated that policy to comply with the code changes that were done late last year by city council. So,
and that's been since the amended version of the policy has been filed with the clerk and also shared with the controller's office. So we believe this concern has been addressed since the report was authored. Regarding trends in waiver requests and ultimately the granting of waivers, OMB was not tracking those waiver requests until after 2019 because until 2020 the process was housed in the law department, but incomplete records show at least 18 waivers in 2019, so more than is noted here. I'm not entirely sure the source of the discrepancy, but otherwise we agree with the findings as it relates to the trends in waivers, and would just also note that they are trending down the past 2 complete fiscal years. And again, I'll turn it over to Jen on this one.
Sure. This is talking about the findings on the overview of our bids and RFPs. Just a couple of notes on these bullet points. There's a bullet point 5 that says the selection committees typically are OMB staff and staff from the using departments. I just wanted to note that OMB Procurement does not serve or vote on any of the selection committees. We are simply there to manage the process and ensure its integrity, that information that shouldn't be shared with vendors isn't happening. There's not communication going between vendors and using departments that should not be occurring. There's the third bullet point from the bottom on our protest procedure. There is a process for addressing protests related to the award. It kind of infers that this is on the RFP process, and I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear that there's a bid protest process in code for all of our types of solicitations, not just RFPs. So a bid protest can be placed on any type of solicitation that the city puts out. Continued clarifications in the section labeled bid process. I want to make sure that it is clear that what they are addressing in this section is our invitation for bid process, also known as our low bids. That is where you pass the annual legislation, because we do not have discretion in award. It has to be the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And I also wanted to make just a clarification here that it said some RFPs are awarded by certain location. These would be low bids. These would not be RFPs. Those terms often get confused. So I just wanted to make that little correction there and clarification. And IFBs are sometimes awarded by certain locations. They are also awarded lowest overall, lowest by group, or lowest by line item, and that depends on what we are procuring and what is in the best interest of the city. So there are multiple ways, and I just wanted to throw those other ones out there. Further down in the bid process, there is a note that the controller's office is not consistently being invited to our bid openings, nor made aware of calendar rescheduling. And also that the bid opening is the only time that somebody can see the results. I wanted to note that the bid opening is the only time that vendors can see others' submissions until after a contract is executed. Once the contract is executed and it's subject to right to know, they can request to see all of the full bid tabs and everything, not just what we display on the screen.
I'll just note that happens with great frequency, right?
Yes.
We receive right-to-know requests from unsuccessful bidders routinely, many times a week, which is a normal business practice and totally understandable. Someone who does not have the winning bid then submits a right-to-know request to get copies of the other bids, or of the winning bid and other bids, to understand how to compete better in the next phase in the process. So a lot of folks who are involved in this type of work are aware of that ability and submit those routinely.
And we even get requests for folks who did attend the bid opening because they want to analyze them in more detail and really look into the line items to see where they may have missed the mark. Additionally, I just wanted to note that the Controller's Office is invited to all of our IFB low bid openings as per code. We are not even, my staff's not even allowed to open the bid until someone from their office is either in our conference room or on Teams. And I wanted to note that not all solicitation types are required and subject to public bid openings. So there are requests for quotes and RFPs that are not required to have a public bid opening. This is just an additional clarification for when an RFP is required. It's required when a professional service is over $5,000, which is the council manic amount. That had been updated a while back when there was a gap between that and the $30,000. So we do require that an RFP be issued for anything over $5,000 that will be contracted. Additionally, just a note from the previous slide, little clarification, the area there that I highlighted in yellow with not a very straight line, that kind of, the deadline and date for submissions, that kind of should be a period. Again, public bid openings by code are only for the IFB process, and RFPs are not subject to public bid openings, so this is just, because this was noted under the RFP process, so just wanted to make that clarification. This is just another question that is probably something like, as Controller Heisler said, they looked back at the 2019 audit, and we have some new systems and processes in place since then. So currently, we do not accept any questions verbally or via email. They must ask all questions through the question and answer tool in OpenGov. With, for those of you who are not familiar, that is our system where all of our solicitations are placed. It ensures sealed bid process and all of our requirements are met. And just a note that while there is a minimum 10-day notice on pre-bid meetings with the city's new pre-bid meeting policy, there is actually no time limit on the date in which they are held. So it doesn't have to be in 10 days. It could be 14, 18, whatever that may be. And additionally, on the second paragraph, this is kind of an older process from when we were doing things manually, and current state is all the questions are received and answered electronically through that question and answer tool in OpenGov. And this enables prospective bidders to get answers in real time rather than having to wait. We used to have to compile all of the questions in a Word document and sit everybody in a room and go through all the questions and get all the answers and then send one big answer out to everybody. It caused a lot of delays in the process as well, because sometimes it took us a while to get the answers. So right now we can answer a question within minutes if we have the answer within minutes. It's cut down on a lot of repeat questions, and it allows those bidders to get their answer quickly and move on with their response. So, and that's an enhancement with the new software that we're able to do that.
As relates to...
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Jen.
I missed that you moved the slide. Sorry. Findings under evaluation committee. Just a note to the comment here, as previously mentioned, OMB procurement does not generally serve on selection committees unless it were something that OMB procurement was specifically buying, like our solicitation software. And the only other occasions that members of OMB are actually scoring and voting on on solicitations if they are requested by another using department. Currently, there are a couple of us evaluating the enterprise content management because that's a citywide thing and every department as input has been requested. Or if the RFP was something for the Office of Management and Budget itself, if we were procuring new budget software, grants software, whatever, fleet services, that would be the only cases where an OMB rep is voting and scoring. So just wanted to make that clarification. And as far as scorecards, this was, again, kind of an older process before we had systems, and we now have a lot more complicated procurements than we used to. So currently there's not a set time limit for submitting scorecards. They are now done in the OpenGov system directly, so they are there for posterity, not on somebody's X drive or wherever. So they're no longer done in Excel and manually sent to OMB to be compiled. That's, again, all done automatically in the system, and it is there for a permanent record.
So just again to summarize, those responses are primarily just corrections or further clarifications of some particular factual information. As Jen mentioned, many of those changes are things that have been implemented since 2019 when the previous audit was conducted and may not have been captured in the updated review that went into the report. But we do, as a whole, generally agree with the findings that are included in the controller's report, and just wanted to note some of those clarifications. With respect to the recommendations themselves, wanted to take this opportunity just to provide what would, in a formal audit, more or less be a management response to the terms there. So recommendation 1 suggested that the legal citations and definitions pertaining to RFPs, RFP confidentiality provisions be clarified. We don't disagree with the need to ensure that the rationale behind those provisions is properly documented, and will happily work with the law department, counsel, and the controller's office to ensure that we have clear documentation of that of those rationale. Ultimately, the existing provisions are necessary to prevent the disclosure of proprietary information from respondents during the review process. You heard Jen mention earlier, sometimes proprietary information or proprietary products, rather, are the reason for a sole source award. But even in instances where there are multiple potential respondents, sometimes their response includes proprietary information that would ultimately be redacted in what is shared via a right-to-know request, but it's necessary to keep that information confidential during the award phase. Recommendation 2 proposes that council seek to look into how to retain requisite confidentiality provisions while having access to review proposals prior to approval. Just noting for general awareness, and again, this is, I believe, a change that's been implemented more recently, that a list of respondents and selection committee members are included in the fiscal impact statement associated with each resolution requesting authorization to enter a contract. Those documents are part of the formal legislative record, so that information at least is routinely disclosed when we're seeking authorization to enter contracts. But consistent with the last answer, if in documenting the basis for the confidentiality provisions, we are able to identify whether there are opportunities to expand the summaries included in the fiscal impact statement or otherwise, we're completely open to that. Recommendation 3 proposes that council may decide that the controller's office should also be able to review proposals prior to approval. On this one, we disagree with the proposal based in part on the structure the Home Rule Charter provides for the separation of powers between the branches of city government, namely that subsection 404H limits the controller's authority in contracting to ensuring that no appropriations are overdrawn. On that basis, it's our interpretation that the controller's countersignature on contracts is verification that the necessary funds are available to pay the contract, but that the discretion to to propose a selection and then the authority to grant the ability to enter that contract is by charter provided to the executive and legislative branches, and that to allow for another entity to potentially essentially have the ability to stop the process would be counter to the the structure provided for in the charter. Recommendation 4 builds on the previous recommendation in suggesting that some bid process oversight duties be returned to the controller's office, including monitoring the entire bid process, ensure adherence to established procedures and ethical standards, and review and address any conflicts of interest or complaints. On this one, we wanted to note that the code presently provides for other independent bodies to conduct these activities. So adherence to the requirements of the procurement code is specifically assigned to the purview of the Equal Opportunity Review Commission. Adherence to ethical standards and conflict of interest requirements are within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Hearing Board. So to the extent that council sought to follow this recommendation, corresponding changes would need to be made to the established jurisdiction of those two bodies. Further, we would argue that active participation in bidding oversight by the controller's office could present the potential for conflict in a future audit, because there would be controller staff participating in the process. So effective auditing, if there were to be either performance or fiscal shortcomings in the contracting process, would be facilitated by not commingling the roles. Recommendation 5, council may seek to identify opportunities to request additional documentation for sole source waivers, including a more detailed description of reasoning. Again, we are happy to pursue that. Again, our primary goal would be to ensure that that documentation does not compromise proprietary information. But if there is a way in which we can, document the nature of the proprietary information that prevents us from seeking further respondents or a more competitive process, happy to do so. Recommendation 6 suggests that the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission or the Office of Equal Protection look at disparate impacts emerging from changes to the solicitation process. Again, just referring to the code providing the Equal Opportunity Review Commission authority to make that assessment and to oversee that action. I think that it is a great recommendation for a review by the EORC, but it would, under current code, most appropriately be the EORC that conducted that review. And recommendation 7 refers to creating an easily accessible online portal where bid opportunities, submissions, and evaluations are published. Here we would note that there are existing systems that contain most of the information suggested here. OpenGov, which you heard Jen speak to earlier, includes descriptions of solicitations and evaluation criteria during the selection review process. After a contract has been awarded, the open book platform includes big bid tabs alongside the executed contract. Now, the final point notes that the city is currently evaluating a new enterprise content management system, and the controller's office is preparing an RFP to seek a new software platform to replace OpenBook. Either or both of those systems could include additional functionality that locates all of this information in one place or increases functionality, and we're very open to having that dialogue as both agencies are looking at securing those new services. Justifications for final selections are documented but not released publicly, as they're exempt from public disclosure. So we do retain those records. This gets back to the confidentiality legal question addressed earlier. That's the entirety of our reaction to the report. Again, I would describe OMB's approach as agreeing overall with the findings and the statements of fact, with a few clarifications, largely of more recent changes, and then our reaction to the proposed changes or recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you. Before necessarily opening it up to members, any sort of initial response from the Controller's Office?
I think there's definitely an appreciation for the very thoroughness of going through the report. The one thing that was a challenge just by the direction of council was really to just look at how waivers have impacted. In our office, in the Controller's Office, there is not a procurement expert on staff, so there was a lot of education just identifying all the terminology and trying to get those terms to match what the conversation council as a body sort of had about waivers. So there was really a direction to try and identify where the questions were coming from council. And again, because this wasn't an audit, the suggestions at the end from our office were perhaps very open-eyed and just trying to address what was perceived as questions related to transparency, and just how could we make certain suggestions that were potential opportunities to be looked at further if there was such a desire from whichever body would be most appropriate to address.
And I'll just also add, as Chief of Staff, I'm sorry.
Jake is fine.
Sorry, as Jake said, and Chief Procurement Officer Olsinger, the City Controller's Office role with the contracting process is, generally speaking, at the end to verify funds. So when there are questions about a waiver, they actually go to council before they even make their way to our office. So a non-written recommendation is for council to just understand that we don't vote on, we're not our role in that process is literally to make sure there is money. There are instances where there have been, when Mike's role is to go through and make sure all the documentation's there and the paperwork's as required by code. But when there are questions or, we have an issue with the contract, we have a working relationship with the solicitor, with Jake, and we'll go and say, can you clarify this, or this doesn't make sense? But we don't, redline contracts. That isn't the role of our office. And so when waiver questions come to us, it's already been approved by council by the time we see that documentation. So I would just flag that for you all. If you have an issue with a waiver, the appropriate time to bring that up is when it comes before council. And I don't know that our office is actually, we generally speaking don't use waivers just because we do so little procurement in our office. But the appropriate way to handle that is before you vote on it, to address a lot of those, all concerns with the mayor's office, because it's not something that goes through our office for approval. And I'm thrilled with the change that came in November, that it now goes to the city solicitor as well. I think that is an excellent addition to just check that the process is operating as it should and that the city's complying with the law.
I would just add that for the waiver documentation, when a resolution is passed for a certain contract, that usually on Legistar, that the waiver document's also posted on there too with the resolution. So if I look at a contract, I'm looking for the resolution first, but then I'll see if there's any other documentation on there, and usually that's where they put the waiver information for that.
Thank you. I'll begin with Councilman Strasburger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all for being here and for the presentation. And I really just want to focus in on how this fits into, I guess, waivers and procurement as it comes to us in context. So, you know, there are probably larger structural changes that could be made that we could, you know, glean from this and make in an overarching way. But as it comes to us, you know, we get the legislation sent over from the mayor on Fridays, and then it's prepared by our clerk's office. And, you know, generally by the end of the day, we have the next week's agenda before us. We will be making some informal changes, potentially some formal changes, to sort of just highlight in the title of the bill which bills have waivers, so that it's daylighting it for us. It's always been there. It's always been there for us to find, but it'll just kind of make it more present for us. For both of you who are, you know, all of you who are here today, what would be your recommendation for us as council members to do next? We see that there's a waiver in the title of the bill, and we see that there, you know, we look at the waiver. What comes next in your mind? What comes next for us?
I think a smart thing might be to implement is to invite the department that requested the waiver in and just explain verbally to council why the waiver is necessary. Because I think there are legitimate justifications and needs for waivers. I mean, I would never suggest getting rid of that practice. I think it's essential. But I do think that that conversation, even if it lasts for 5 minutes and it's like, this is, you know, there's no one else that does this work. We need a waiver. Or, you know, whatever the circumstance might be. But I think that having the, I guess I'm telling you guys what to do with your staff, and that's not my intention. But I do think that that conversation between the department and council, just to ask, you know, explain that justification verbally, would be helpful for the process as a whole.
And if I could build on that, yeah, I think that one of the things that reviewing this report, I think, brought to my attention is the potential, or a suggestion that I might have, is the potential to utilize the financial impact statement that's associated with the legislation as a place to also provide some more of that rationale. We have instituted policies and practices of putting more of that narrative information and not just strictly the financial information into the financial impact statements, but I think there's an opportunity to provide some of the waiver justification in those instances in the financial impact statements too, which may head off, may address questions proactively. But as the controller mentioned, you know, we're always either departmental staff or where applicable OMB staff happy to either during the consideration of the bill at standing committee or otherwise address those questions about a waiver.
That's helpful. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any other members? Councilwoman Warwick?
I guess I'll start. I apologize for not knowing this, but just for this report, did we request this report or did you? Oh, we were.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And I do think, and Andrew, you should speak also, but one thing that we have discovered from doing this process is, because this wasn't an audit, so it doesn't follow the traditional process that an audit goes through. This was a report. But one thing that would be helpful, and we've continued this, Councilman Charland introduced legislation earlier this year about quality of life, code enforcement, excuse me, I'm sorry. But, you know, we had a follow-up conversation with Councilman Charland in his office to better understand what he was seeking. And I think that that practice will continue. So anytime that this body or the administration wants an audit done, we will follow up and say, like, tell us exactly what you're trying to find, as you and I have done as it relates to some issues with public safety. So I think that this has been a learning experience for us in getting you know, we're thrilled to always take guidance from city council or from the administration and what you'd like us to look into. But a conversation, I think, is always going to be warranted for afterward to figure out exactly what we're trying to deduct and cover, whatever. So yes, this was requested by council.
Okay, so in the report it said that there has been an increase in waivers, but that they're around public safety law and IMP. So I understand the IMP part, right? Like you have, like, you know, you
Yeah.
have an Apple phone and an Apple, you know, and a Mac, and then you need all the Apple stuff because otherwise you got to buy everything new. So I get that. For law, is that because we're working with firms that are we like re-upping contracts on long-lasting cases, or just relationships that we have?
Didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, please.
Those are in regard to mostly litigation and lawsuits that are on the rise. So their need for additional experts in different fields is the trend that I've seen. Mostly, you know, firms that specialize in maybe immigration and that specialize in, you know, different issues that come across them that the city law department does not have that expertise in. And so that's, you know, to help properly defend the city.
And
Okay.
Just to clarify, that is itself a freestanding waiver justification. So it's not that we are seeking a waiver due to lack of others in that practice area, but the contracts associated with litigation have a waiver authorization as part of the code. So anytime they're seeking the support of an outside law firm for litigation purposes, a waiver is submitted saying that it's related to litigation.
Also expert witnesses as well.
Okay, is that just for expediency in the cases and whatnot?
Expediency or not violating privilege in the engagement process, right? So for them to procure, for them to do a competitive bid of firms, one, yes, that would add a lot of time, which is often not something that we have the opportunity, the luxury of, but also in order to preserve the confidentiality of information or prevent conflict of interest.
Right. Oh, okay. So like if the other opposing side is also looking for an expert witness, you don't want to...
Things of that nature, yes.
Okay. And then for public safety, so that's the one where I kind of have, because, and I assume it's similar to IMP where we have, I know, like we had this with our tasers and body kit, you know, it's like there's one and then you have to do the other. Those are, of course, contracts where, yeah. So is that the case with public safety, or?
Yeah, similarly, they have some very specialized software that they have to do continuation of services on. You can't just necessarily, you know, replace your case management software and all that history. Not only is it very time consuming and resource heavy, but it's also very, very expensive. So if we have these computer systems, and they just have a lot, I think, more of them than other areas of the city, and you're combining all bureaus rather than just one single department, I think it would tend to stand out a little more. They also have, you know, they need consistency of their equipment. So like all of our AEDs are Zols so that everybody knows how to exactly use the same AED, and you're not, you know, switching from machine to machine. And familiarity, that's, you know, honestly, it's a, you know, a health and safety issue. If somebody's fumbling trying to use an AED that they're unfamiliar with, that's somebody's life. So.
I would, though, also note that I think if you look at Table 2 on page 6 of the report, probably one of the contributing factors to public safety being noted is a single contract in 2021 with the Center That Cares, but it was for $9 million. That's part of our violence interruption initiatives or group violence intervention. I don't happen to know off the top of my head what the waiver rationale was in that case, but that one contract alone is maybe the reason that they rose to the top, simply because of its size. There was only one public safety contract in the last 2 years that is on this list of largest contracts receiving waivers. I'm not suggesting that it was the only one, but and that was with OBB for $2.1 million. Finally, just quickly noting that Table 1 demonstrates that the number of waiver requests has been going down. it was 48 in 2020, increased to 71 in 2021, but has been in the low 50s the past 2 complete years. And that's that trend is consistent in public safety, with only 8 in each of those years compared to 20 and 14 respectively in the years preceding that. So I think we are reducing the number of instances in which we're pursuing waivers, particularly in public safety. Law is heading the other way, again, largely due to just an increased amount of litigation at the moment.
And then, so OMB and the solicitor's office sign off on the waivers. Do you sit down together and work on that together, like review it together? Do you review it independently of each other?
We review it independently.
Okay.
The requests come personally to me first, and they don't even go on to law. For law to waste their time if I don't like it.
Okay.
Or I don't think it's right. And there's many times that I've said no.
Yeah.
No, go do your RFP, or don't. So it would be a waste of their resources to look at something that procurement even
Right.
says no. So
Okay.
so currently, if I'm on board and their justification meets what I feel is okay, it passes on to one of the law staff, and she does whatever research that the solicitor would ask her to do. She presents the information to Krisha, and whatever Krisha needs to feel comfortable, and then she will sign off. So they do their own separate investigation, I guess, into the legitimacy of each request, separate from us. So.
Okay, so with my next one's gonna be like, how are the reviewers chosen? But it sounds like you're the reviewer for most cases.
Unless I'm not here,
Unless you're on
and then it would
vacation.
go,
and they go, okay.
roll up to JP
Okay.
if it was something that couldn't wait. But they're usually not that urgent. So.
And many of them are, by volume, again, they're often fairly straightforward, right? The legal ones are straightforward, obviously, if it concerns litigation. Continuation of services, similarly, is the investigation, so to speak, is, are we in fact continuing a service that we're already receiving? So whether or not there is a question that we can and do ask there, is it in the best interest of the city financially or from an operational point of view to continue with an existing vendor versus going back out to bid? Oftentimes we are addressing that question before we even get a waiver proposal, right? That's coming up when budget staff are working with departments to identify the funds available for a contract, and we're routinely, even at that stage, saying we don't think it's appropriate to just go for continuation, and we suggest a new bid. But in terms of documenting, a waiver request that makes it to that stage, continuation is a fairly clear one to determine. And then the solicitor's office conducts their own review. But the volume that are being requested for sole source or single source or something where the review might be more extensive is relatively small.
And so I guess, because I had some questions but so just so I'm clear on the recommendations from the controller's office. So controller, you're recommending adding a controller review.
So when this was requested, this report, the solicitor was not signing off on waivers. I'm comfortable with that new added process. That was done at the end of the year.
Okay.
I mean, if that was helpful, I mean, we would be happy to offer advice. If you guys had questions like, is this a good idea, or do you have concerns, our office would be happy to entertain that. But I don't think that it is wise, because of our role of auditing this work, for us to be like, oh, this is okay and this isn't okay. I don't know that that's appropriate. I do think that the solicitor, or theoretically, someone who's independent from the procurement process, to be reviewing and signing off on waivers, though. And I think like I mentioned earlier, that's a welcome change.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So then that because that sort of sounds like what you all were saying too, is that because you would
Yeah.
potentially be, auditing the contract, having participated in choosing the contract, or,
Vendor,
choosing
yeah.
the vendor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
might
that,
not be.
I completely agree with that conclusion, that the integrity of the controller's audit practices were, anytime an audit were to be conducted, are enhanced by not having been hands-on at this stage in the process.
Okay. And just for me, so I was just looking on OpenGov, this procurement portal. So is this where, because I was looking just at some, so this looks like there's projects, a calendar, and contracts. So once the contract's been awarded, then all the bids are there for the public to see?
That would help. No, we submit the bid tabs with the executed contract in DocuSign to the controller's office, and they are then, the bid tabs are then posted in Open Book.
Okay, so that's a different,
Correct.
and also available to the public?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Open Book is the system of record of all contracts, I believe invoices.
No, so
some
Open
other.
Book is only, it's a controller's office. You and I, Councilperson Warwick and I have discussed this. It's only things that the controller signs. So there are MOUs.
True.
There are things that don't come through our office that are executed legal agreements that we do not see and do not sign. So it is not comprehensive.
That is true.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No, that is true. And I believe I think invoices are out there and some campaign finance information.
So that's fiscal focus, yeah.
So we don't, in OpenGov, the only contracts that we track in there are the ones that the city departments can use. So if there's leases or professional service agreements specific to one department and stuff, you're not going to find that in OpenGov, but you will find that in Open Book, amongst other things.
Jen, I would just interject that the bid tabs aren't included in DocuSign with the contracts.
Correct.
I have to, always ask whoever reviewed it in your office to send it
Correct.
an email to me. Well, sometimes they're ahead of time, but others I have to, once I have the contract, it's like, why, I need it's called the evaluation tabulation. So.
Yeah, then law does not want them in DocuSign. So that's why we send them separately.
Yeah, but I'm just saying you said it was in DocuSign.
I misspoke.
Yeah.
But they are ultimately posted in Open Book, correct?
Yeah, once I get them, I put them onto OnBase, and then they should go onto Open Book from there.
But they're not reviewed as part of the contract.
No, it's not in the contract package when in DocuSign, right?
But Mike does review the bid tabs to make sure that we've done our job right.
Oh yeah, I'll make sure I get that. And
On the
go
one
through.
I was like, oh, he's right. We messed up on that one. So we.
Yeah, I forget what that was. It was a big one. I forget the circumstances now.
I don't know if it's appropriate if I ask a question, but for procurement, so I understand the confidentiality issues that exist. Would it be, because we don't see the non-selected bid responses, and is it possible to allow people to opt in to disclosure? So if there are 3 responses to X RFP and the awarded one is public, but the other 2 if you asked, is this proprietary? Does that make sense? Because that's the thing, we actually don't see the non-selected responses for an RFP.
Currently, our direction is that has to be done for a right to know request to the law department.
Okay, so
that they can
that's
then
how the
redact.
public-
They can redact anything that would be proprietary before they give it to the public. And that happens quite often. We get those requests.
And that'll be like from generally someone who didn't get picked, and then they want to look at the others or whatever.
It could be news media too.
Right.
It could be.
The highest volume are commercial requests, folks seeking to get that documentation who participated or who watched that market, to see what bids are look like. But that's not the only source of those kind of requests. By volume, that's the most people who submit that kind of request, but we get them from news media and others routinely as well.
Okay, so the public does not have, the public has access to the contracts, but not the bids.
The public has access to the contract and the bid tabulation for the selected bidder, as well as the request for proposals itself, right, which outlines what the scope of work was and what the evaluation criteria were, and then through the legislative process, a list of who reviewed and who responded, which companies or vendors responded, and then who was part of the review process. To maybe put a finer point on one of our responses to a recommendation, I think that information, we have opportunities through 2 upcoming improvements to some of the city's systems to better centralize that information. If you wanted to, any member of the public has access to all the things I just listed, but you would have to look in 3 different places to pull it together. And so we probably could, through the implementation of those 2 changes, make it more consolidated and easier to find and interpret.
Yeah, I would add that there's a lot of better technology now that we could make it more easily findable, searchable by keywords and things like that. Currently, I mean, it's there, but you got to know what you're looking for. You have to know what we named it. So it can be tricky to find if you're not savvy. So it's what a lot of people are they do a right to know request, so we do it for them. But like I said, there's a lot of information out there, but I would agree that it is difficult to find. And with these new systems, we could, have a lot better search capabilities for the public to be more easily find the information that they're looking for.
Okay, I don't think I have any other questions if anyone has anything to add. No? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Councilwoman Gross?
Thank you all. I think good to have just a review of all of these processes for the public record. I didn't hear anyone speak to non-city funds, specifically of what's been on my mind, and it's some conversation at council, is the allocation of ARPA funds. So I have a letter from the Pennsylvania Association for Nonprofit Organizations that says that city councils have the power to allocate these federal relief funds to specific organizations. There's other ARPA language that says like municipalities should follow their own procurement procedures. So that leaves a little gray area. And so we have examples of cities just allocating, because of the nature of the funds, they don't require these kinds of waivers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're sole source or single source. It doesn't matter. There's no requirement for RFP. So do you want to make any comment to that, Controller?
The Controller's Office is not a budgeting body, and we, will audit that spending.
We're talking about procedures.
Yep. So I would assume, as someone who is not a lawyer, but that money comes through the general fund. And while it was a grant from the federal government, or, however you want to quantify that, it is coming through our office and being processed by our office. So I would consider it a city fund. And I would assume that city procurement policies would apply, but I'm not.
That would be in direct opposition to the statements from the Pennsylvania Association for Nonprofit Organizations. So I'm not sure.
I think in most of the instances that the controller's referencing, though the distinction is not, that distinction doesn't apply. Most of the funds that are being processed through the general fund or the project fund are those funds that we're expending on capital projects or that were used to directly underpin city operations, salaries, and benefits. In both of those cases, the procurement process is not, in the operating instance, the procurement process is not relevant anyway. In the context of capital projects, ARPA is typically one of multiple sources that is supporting those projects, so they otherwise have to utilize procurement processes. And specifically as relates to capital projects, there are in fact in some instances, other sections of the ARPA guidelines that require certain things. So
I think I can keep that straight in my head. So
yeah.
Let me see if I heard that right, and for the public. So it's like the city's building a playground. And so there are ARPA funds being used for that playground. And so, but if we're going to buy the rubber matting, or we're going to hire someone or purchase the playground equipment, we follow our procurement procedures.
That's correct.
City council wants to allocate, $500,000 to the food bank because their refrigerator just broke, and these are COVID relief funds, and we have hungry households. City council has the authority to just allocate $500,000 to a food bank or a warehouse.
I can't give you 100% confirmation of that particular scenario. I can imagine a scenario where if the funds moved directly from the ARPA trust fund to making that award, that would be possible. And this also relates to some of the recent discussion around Juneteenth and some of the documentation that we've been sharing with one another in preparation to advance there. So I think that there is a category of ARPA expenditure that is not direct operating support, not direct capital project funding, where the ARPA rules from Treasury would prevail, and there's no other city requirements that would be triggered, right, is the best way I can put that. As to interpreting the ARPA guidelines, I would defer to Mar Dussel.
Sure. So in all cases, no matter what we're doing, we have to make sure that we follow the United States Treasury Department guidelines.
That's correct.
So we do not have to pay the money back, right? I mean, that is that's the topmost concern. And so, yes. So in the cases that I gave the example to, they have to adhere to the ARPA guidelines. And we are still kind of like triple checking and finding examples from other cities of the way they've allocated their funds to meet the city's needs, whether that's at Williamsport, Pennsylvania, or Cleveland, Ohio, trying to look at the way they've allocated their ARPA funds to see that we're doing the most that we can for the community needs that we see that these funds are appropriate for, but that we do so in a way that's adheres.
Maybe provide a more direct or useful answer to your question. If council were to use the example that you gave, make a direct allocation to an entity like the food bank for reasons you mentioned, OMB would consult Mar Dussel, who we've hired as our ARPA consultant auditor, to get their interpretation of whether the specific circumstances provided for in the allocation comply with Treasury guidance. And if they did, there would be no other area of city code that would block that. It would only be an interpretation of the guidance.
Okay, that's very helpful, I think. But just so that people understand that the source of funds is one thing, and we have to be compliant no matter what we do with the Treasury guidelines. But then the uses of the funds, not just the source of the funds, but the use of the funds also kind of trigger certain different rules. Yes. Okay.
And commingling ARPA funds with other sources of funds, as is the case in most of the capital projects we're using, because if multiple sources are there, then whatever the most restrictive requirements are prevail.
Okay, I got that. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman?
Thank you. So I have a couple questions, not too much here, but I really appreciate this, and I've learned a lot here. Let's start off, why do we require someone to submit a right to know to be able to see their bits? Why, if we're going to go through the process of giving the information over, why do we make them go through the hurdle of the right to know process?
It's basically the law, state law, and also that gives us the opportunity to, for law to go in and redact any of that proprietary or confidential information in a response that may have been notified before, like any other requests for legal documents where there are certain things that need to be redacted. That's why it has to go through that office.
Maybe put a finer point on that. To preemptively make the information available would require that the law department do a thorough review of every document associated with a procurement and redact or remove those items which are not subject to public disclosure, which is a very high volume, to rely on requests to drive when that review is conducted, allows us to only do that level of work on items that have been requested, and thus doesn't bog the law department down with a constant flow of those reviews. The second reason is the right to know law does allow for commercial requests the responding agency to charge a fee associated with the costs of the need of their review. So if someone is doing it as a part of commercial research, there's a cost recovery mechanism for us that does not apply to public requests or media requests.
Okay. That makes sense there. Yeah. I don't know, learning a lot more about right to knows and kind of why we do them and opportunities to improve in the system there. So very much appreciate that. The interesting point that you brought up here, that kind of you are the first measure when we're looking at a waiver and looking at a whatever might be happening there. If you are the and you said that some of them just come to you and you say, there's no way this is going to be sole source or single source, we're going to pass
Yes,
pass
quite
this.
often.
How often does it happen the other way, where you say this is fine, this is a sole source, and you send it to law, and law then says, no, we're not okay with this?
It hasn't happened yet, but they've only been reviewing them for about 6 months. There was one instance where there was some concern, and we had some discussions and went back and forth with the department, mostly in regard to the term of the request, there was some back and forth, and we ultimately all landed on a solution that was happy for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting there. And I understand that the controller mentioned that this gives her a little more comfort in the process, having law sign off on it. But, according to our organizational chart, the law department reports to OMB. So essentially, it is the same rule of OMB is kind of still the only organization signing off on this. The distinction I would only draw is that the responsibilities of the law department and the solicitor, particularly as the city's legal counsel, are unique from and stand somewhat separate from the overall sort of administrative or managerial structure, right? So you're correct that administratively, right, the way that Mayor Gainey has saw fit to organize his administration is to have OMB playing that coordinating role in the day-to-day work of the city. The solicitor and the associate solicitors and assistant solicitors retain a great degree of autonomy in giving legal advice, right? So we request legal opinions from them. Often we don't assert the outcome we're seeking that legal opinion to provide. The solicitor provides legal advice to the mayor directly outside of that sort of chain of command frequently, right? So yes, as a day-to-day administrative approach, what you've said is correct. But I will agree that they have an independence in their review of these items that is not directed by anyone, frankly, but the solicitor. But it could be. I mean, but according to the flow chart there, you're in charge of them.
Yes, I don't disagree, I suppose, with you as a matter of structure. But.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's important that we talk about that when we talk about the flow chart and the way that the org chart, that is a flow chart, that the way that we've structured the government where most things do come through OMB. So to say that there's a level of autonomy, the controller has autonomy, city council has autonomy, but the rest of the departments within the administration don't really. So
no, and nor would they if OMB were not in that role, then it would be the mayor and the mayor's office that would be in that position. So, and in fact, per the code, OMB is a bureau of the mayor's office. So I think your point is taken, but it's a function of the separation of powers, right? The executive, legislative, and auditing branch, less so the internal organization of the executive branch, right? Any set of changes there still ultimately result in the same authority.
But there's a reason we don't want the mayor's office doing procurement. I mean, no one would think that would be a good system, right? You know, we wouldn't want that actually happening in the mayor's office, but functionally, it's not far from that.
I'm suggesting that there isn't any place within the executive branch you could put it that would be significantly further from it than where it presently lies. That's the nature of kind of the structure that the charter provides to us.
Yeah. Okay. My other question there, so, and this is just for my knowledge, when we talk about selection committees that decide who receives a bid, how is that formed? How do we determine a selection committee? There's a couple times that we've asked about contracts, and I've heard different folks have been put on there, but how is that decision made?
Case by case, honestly. It depends on what the project is, and who the subject matter experts are. Like I mentioned, for the enterprise-wide content management system, that we're currently reviewing, that affects every city department. So, there's 30 people reviewing these proposals, watching the demos, giving their input. If it's something where, think of an example, PLI with their permits and licensing software, that's specific just to them, but because it is software, there's always going to be somebody from IT on it. So, it depends on who the stakeholders are. If it's a public safety contract, it could be all the people from all the bureaus, right, in public safety. And if it's software, then again, you're always throwing in IT. So it really just depends on the nature of, what we're looking at and, who the stakeholders and subject matter experts are.
So to make the public feel more comfortable with this process, help me understand how you would come to that conclusion. I mean, and who all is involved in selecting? Is there a committee that selects the selection committee? Like, how does that work? Is it just, the direction of you or someone else or whoever?
My staff works with all of the stakeholders in the using departments to determine, usually the department directors have a lot of say as to who from their team should be involved in recommending decisions to them if a lot of times the directors don't have the capacity to do it themselves. So
the purpose of the committee is to assemble the knowledge about the problem that being solved through the procurement, assemble that knowledge to review the respondents so that they can make a determination about which one best meets the need identified in the request, right? So in a single department, if the request is for the use of a single department, say the planning department is seeking a consultant for a neighborhood plan, right? Then the planning director would assemble the necessary planners who would be working on that project, and they may constitute the review committee in that instance. In multi-departmental instances, we play a coordinating role, we meaning OMB, and more specifically, Jen's team, in identifying the full scope of stakeholders who need to be represented, right? Which using departments might need to have a representative or representatives, but then ultimately we defer to the department directors to assign from their teams who sits on the committee.
And another thing that my team kind of does too is to kind of provide guidance as on the selection committees or even developing the RFP is like, hey, we kind of have a bird's eye view because we deal with all of the departments. And what I, task them to do is say, hey, this might affect PLI, what you're doing might affect planning. So we should loop planning into this, right? So we kind of make those types of suggestions and things too, so that we're trying to make sure that, you know, if somebody's doing something that has to be, you know, with vehicles and stuff like that, we're going to say, well, you bring fleet to the table too, you know, so that we're making, not making decisions too far down the path, and then it starts to get to the contract, and then they're like, whoa, red flag, right? So that's kind of my team's role too, is to try and make sure all of the appropriate stakeholders are in the conversations ahead of time.
So I guess the reason I'm concerned about this is you know, the reason why we have procurement and the way we go through this procurement process is so the public trust that we're spending money effectively, right? And so a neighborhood plan is actually a great example of this. You know, often planners will leave the city and start their own consulting firms. What is it? A neighborhood plan would be a prime example where this could happen. What is stopping us from having that planner who's now working for themselves, and the selection committee is made up of other planners? What is stopping them from giving that contract to their friend, other than that you know, your guideline that they're supposed to follow?
Yeah, well, that was going to be the first part of my answer, right? That state law prohibits a former employee from doing business with the city for a year, and that by virtue of being state law is the standard. You know, I think that the questions you're raising are ethical questions, right? That they go
Right.
to you know, adherence to ethical standards and conflict of interest, which ultimately are under the purview of the ethics hearing board and the city ethics officer to investigate if someone were to make a claim that an ethical standard weren't being adhered to. Jen, could you talk to the conflict of interest, like sort of documentation we get from?
Yes. So any member of a selection committee is required to sign a non-conflict of interest. Mainly that, you know, there's not personal relationships where people voting don't stand to gain from anything. And we have had people recuse themselves and said, I'm not voting because, you know, my brother-in-law works there or something like that, right? And they don't even, not that they even would financially gain or have any, you know, relationship with it, they just don't even want the perception. So they'll say, I'm recusing myself, I will not, you know, vote on this contract, even if they are a key stakeholder. They will, you know, pass it on to other folks. But there's a number of things in that statement that they're agreeing to. And should they sign that non-conflict of interest, and, you know, someone feel or find something out that they did not disclose or that they maybe shouldn't have been on that committee, that was something that would, you know, either go to OMI or the ethics hearing board or both to investigate whether that's the case or not.
So, do you work closely with ethics? I mean, again, I think you bring up a good point. This is a very ethical process. We're doing this to maintain public trust. So do you work closely with the ethics hearing board in this?
Yeah, we bring Leanne in when there are things that we have question marks about. Like we had a former employee who went to a consulting firm, and that consulting firm was then bidding on city work. And, you know, this person was at the pre-bid meeting, and we said, I don't know about that. Let's talk to ethics, you know, and that was another department. I don't recall the exact result of you know, whether we were going to tell that company they weren't able to bid, even if the person wasn't on the team. So, you know, because, you know, that inside knowledge could give that company an unfair advantage. So you know, that's one example where we went to ethics and got an opinion.
I mean, so how often are you, I mean, we know how many things we're bidding at. How many?
Once or twice a year.
Okay.
If that. Not very often.
Sure.
And that's just things that we flag. There could be things out there that we would not be aware of that other people could raise.
And then I think kind of my last question here, we talk a lot about the single source and the waivers that happen there. Are there ever instances where you find out that what you may have originally thought of as a sole source provider of a service, you find out later on that they really weren't sole source?
I have not had that occasion happen, but there is, initially, we have a limit of 3 years of calling something a single source or a sole source, so that it's reviewed on a consistent basis, because just because it was 3 years ago doesn't mean it is now, especially in technology, which, as much as things move and you know, there's new players and things like that, you know, what may have been 3 years ago may very well not be in a couple of years. So that's one of the things that, you know, we look at. Just because it was sole source the last time doesn't mean it still is.
Councilman, just to also kind of address the use of single source or sole source as the idea of it being something different is slightly incorrect, because they are categories listed in the code for reasons for a waiver from the competitive process. So a sole source reasoning is the reason for the waiver, and I think some of our counts also showed that the increases for the continuation of services, because it's then to extend something that was a sole source or single source reason for a waiver 3 years prior.
Sure. So, I mean, the one that kind of, you know, obviously comes to mind is the Matrix study. And we said that the Matrix was a sole source provider, correct? It received a waiver for that reason, right?
For services related to litigation.
For litigation services, so it wasn't the sole source.
Potential litigation, yeah. Well, there wasn't litigation at that time, but it was related to potential litigation.
Okay, so that the waiver, I apologize, I thought the waiver was because it was a sole source. Okay.
The rationale for the waiver was the likelihood, this didn't end up being the case, but the likelihood that the police contract would be resolved in arbitration, which the previous several contracts had been.
Okay, then my questions there don't make sense anymore. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilman Mosley, Councilman Coghill, or Councilman Coghill?
Go ahead. All right, thank you. Gentleman, he's a gentleman. Thank you. Some water over there. So, sorry I missed most of the meeting. Okay. Councilwoman Kill-Smith and I were solving the spade and neuter problems in the city. So I forgot that we had the meeting, and you know we tried to listen in, but I missed most of it, I will tell you. So I'm going to go a little bit off subject, if I may, regarding contracts and sole sources or single sources. So just recently with Juneteenth, right? So we had a sole source in the Poise Foundation a couple years ago when we approved the $250,000. No? It wasn't a sole source? B. Marshall was the sole source.
Ooh, the money was for Poise, right? And that was done through some other form of ARPA allocation, if I'm...
There was a waiver in the original one. I believe
Was
it was
there?
nonprofit providing services, I believe.
Sole source, it's right here.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Oh, I see, because it was the only event at the
Right.
time, yeah.
Right. So it was all...
yeah, that I don't remember.
What's that? Back then. We didn't need it? Well,
Councilwoman Gross is, I think, referring to a point she made earlier about ARPA funds and the procurement requirements not applying.
and is that true?
We applied the procurement process in that and other similar instances.
Got it.
As relates to the discussion we had earlier about this type of question. It is something that under the current iteration of this discussion, we're pursuing guidance on the federal requirements, specifically to her question, from the firm that we hired to help us with ARPA compliance, Mar Dussel. We've also we've had some correspondence with the council president and the controller about addressing the very specific procedural, I guess, questions about that.
Okay, so we put them as a sole source back then, thinking we had to. And Deb and I talked about this off before too, and she had mentioned the same thing when she asked you. So we don't know yet if that didn't require it because it was ARPA money, to be a sole source. We don't know. We did it out of caution, I guess, the first time. We thought we had to, and
it has been our practice,
yeah,
right?
sure,
right. To
yeah,
utilize
I can
the code,
understand
yeah.
that, right? And if we don't have to do it, great. That'll help.
I do understand.
Clear up.
I do understand the question
Yes.
that she's raised, though, and it's something that we're currently.
And it will
examining.
help clear up the situation we're in now, if that is the case, of course.
It would.
When I say
yes.
now, I mean failure to pay what we, kind of obligated ourselves to during the original sole source when we approved the $250,000. But that's neither here nor there. But now, because the administration had their own Juneteenth and we opened it up to bidders, it is now considered no longer a sole source because people are now bidding on a Juneteenth celebration, even though they didn't have one previously. They're bidding on it, but they never really held, as far as other than B. Marshall, to my knowledge, there was nobody, whether it was, what was the person that the mayor used for the Juneteenth celebration?
Balance Marketing and
right.
Events was the
They had
selected.
never had a Juneteenth celebration before, or ran a Juneteenth celebration.
They had not prior to this year. There were three. I think our argument in that, or not. I'm not making an argument. A statement of fact, right? There were. We conducted an RFP seeking respondents to make proposals for holding a city-sponsored Juneteenth event. There is an argument that we didn't necessarily have to do an RFP under that Councilwoman Gross is making broadly about the use of ARPA funds. We can still conduct an RFP even if we're not required to do so as a best practice to solicit multiple proposals. We did conduct such an RFP and got 3 responses, which then suggests that there
no
are
longer sole
multiple,
source, is it? Right.
correct, that the specific definition of a sole source does not apply.
So when do you anticipate finding out, whether it's from the federal government or whomever sources your legal advice, I don't know, as to whether, to verify what Councilwoman Gross is stating?
The question as relates specifically to Juneteenth is presently with the solicitor after we've gathered all of the information about that particular instance. So I think fairly soon.
Good. And if Councilwoman Gross is accurate, then we just cut the check and we're done, right?
It doesn't hinge solely on that question, but it could be determined very soon. We would then need to still have a contract with Poise before, to your question, a check could be cut. But again, that doesn't have to take very long.
Okay, so that answers my question. We didn't distribute any money off that as of yet because we don't know what to do, right?
We don't have a contract.
Yeah,
so
we don't have a contract.
Yeah.
I got the emails, of course, so you were in a dilemma is now no longer a sole source because we put it out to bid and other companies bid on it, and that leaves us in a position like, oh, what do we do now, right? Pretty much. Right?
Yes.
I get it. And if Councilwoman Gross is correct, then it kind of clears that up, we hope.
That will be a first.
It would, yeah, yes, it would, particularly because we were using ARPA funds in this instance.
Right.
It would.
Yeah, well, related to ARPA funds, absolutely. Okay, so, Controller, thank you for being here.
Sure. The only thing I would just flag as in continuation of this conversation is just because the money is from a federal source, the public doesn't know that. The public doesn't know where the money's coming from.
Right.
And it would be my non-legal position that we should always do the spirit of our, follow the spirit of our procurement policies and guidelines. And if just because this happens to be from ARPA and as a federal source, I tend to think that we would be acting in the spirit of our procurement policies to, if it wasn't from federal money and it was from city money and a waiver would be required, even though it perhaps doesn't, and we're still waiting explanation from that from the Meyer-Dussel, but even so, it would be I would encourage us to just if we would require a waiver no matter what, we should require a waiver no matter what.
Got it. And,
Would be my
and again,
position
I'm
in the
sorry,
sake
I
of public
missed most
disclosure.
of the conversation. I'll rewatch it because I know I'm interested in the questions that were asked. But in your opinion, Controller, we should have a waiver for everything? Is that
No,
basically-
no, I'm just,
okay,
no,
okay.
I'm just saying, I'm just saying I'm just saying that if this, for this Juneteenth stuff, which is, we've relayed our position to Deputy Mayor Pollack, and we're following the guidance that is provided by the city solicitor in our role in the contracting process. But just as a fellow public official, I think it is a good practice that if, in another instance, if the funds were just city funds and we would follow traditional procurement practices, just because it is ARPA money, I don't think we should ignore all of those policies.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Okay, that's it for now. Yeah. I may go back though. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to watch the meeting as well. I have another meeting waiting for me
I'll get
back
some
there.
popcorn.
And we just had a meeting before about the, actually the spay and neuter program with a couple animal rights groups, with Councilman Coghill and I. So I didn't hear the whole thing, but so I will play it back later and watch it later. But so I apologize. Could you tell me your name and what?
Mike Bros. I'm the contracts division manager in the controller's office.
In the controller's office. Okay, I apologize. I don't think we've ever worked together before. These other people are so lucky they worked with me. So I just want to say a couple of things. Like, I mean, I don't know if anyone here is an attorney or anyone here is an accountant or has an accounting background, but these ARPA dollars are so confusing. I mean, they really are. And I just want to say, I think that we're all put in a really difficult situation not having those kinds of backgrounds. I mean, and it's challenging, you know. And so I think, and we now have a, city solicitor, council solicitor, which, he's works with us really well and makes sure that we're, doing things that, by the book. And sometimes I want to slap him because it's so by the book. But honestly, he really gives us a lot of, really good advice. And so I appreciate that. But I think it's challenging for all of us to find, and I don't know where Meyer Drusel is on this. I mean,
Mardusel is a.
I know who they are, but I'm wondering why. Like, I think they should have been part of this conversation to make sure we are doing things, correctly.
I can answer both of those questions. Sorry,
Go ahead.
They are an accounting and auditing firm.
Right.
They have been engaged by OMB as our advisor on compliance with the federal Treasury rules for ARPA dollars, which is why they've come up in the course of this conversation. They're not here because this post agenda was about waivers of competitive process, not ARPA funds. So we brought folks.
This is such a large part of it right now, I think. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
They're not. There aren't. Most of the instances where waivers apply have not been related to ARPA funds.
Oh, that's good to know. But there have been some?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but
Okay. I don't either. I'm asking.
Where that would come up would be in the bidding of contracts, say for a capital project where we might have a waiver. There are multiple sources of funding, so it could have come up, but it's not a ARPA. Let me say it this way: the questions of waiver of competitive process and ARPA compliance have not been significantly overlapping in the city's experience. There are only a very small number of instances, namely the one we've been talking about here today, where that has been a question, where we have to reconcile ARPA rules and the city procurement code. Councilperson Gross raised a broader question about whether and in what instances ARPA expenditures are exempt from our procurement process. Which is a valid question, but it's not one that has come up all that much heretofore. That doesn't mean that it isn't an appropriate question to answer.
And so I just, I know the controller, you're bonded, correct? Okay.
Yes.
You're bonded to guard against like any type of liability. What kind of things, which type of expenditures could trigger like some type of liability or any concern for the controller's office? Is there anything that we...
Can you clarify that question?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what, we know you're bonded, what type of, to guard against liabilities, which are the expenditures that we issue? Is there any of those that would trigger some type of concern for the controller's office that the bonding would be important. Any type of liability would
I
be.
don't think there's anything in particular. There's not like
Just all of it?
yeah, I mean,
I don't understand a lot about this, so I want to be honest, that's why, so when people ask me stuff, I want to make sure I have the answers. And I just think in general, I'm concerned, I feel like sometimes we get a lot of answers at this table, and I think it seems like there's a lot of times things are not totally accurate, but I think a lot of it comes from, it's our understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way or the appropriate way. So I just want to make sure that when we give information, we're getting accurate information as best we can. And if we don't know, that we're ready to call in an attorney or an accountant or somebody who may know this, or our auditing firm, and have them readily available to us. That's all. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Mosley.
Yeah, I just had one question. I want to first thank the controller and the deputy mayor and your teams for joining us today. And I thank my colleagues for the numerous questions. So, really just had one I wanted to revisit around just, exploring the definitions of the single source versus, the sole source. You gave some examples. Could you kind of just revisit as far as a working example of what a single source would be versus a working example, of a sole source, to have kind of a side-by-side, comparison of what those are? I think it'd be helpful. It's helpful for me, but I think also helpful for the public, since we've been throwing the terminology around.
So, can you repeat between the IFB and the?
Give an example of a sole source and an example of a single source to show the difference.
So a sole source would be something that is proprietary, namely, that somebody has a patent on it, something like that. A single source could be it's only available from one supplier. There are certain things like our fire turnout gear where there are only certain distributors in a region, right, that we can purchase. And in the matter of our turnout gear, it's contractually in their CBA as to what type of brand of turnout gear we are supplying them. Okay. So in that case, that's a single source. Yes, other people sell ABC brand of turnover, but there is only one distributor for this region that we can get it from. Another reason for single source would be that there's only one company that's even willing to contract with us, right? That's very, very rare, because normally we put it out, and if we only get one bid, you don't need a waiver. So that's very, very rare. I don't know if we've ever even used that one. And the third example is there is one solution that uniquely fits the city's needs that no other solution can provide. There's an example of that comes to mind where DPW purchased a software that would kind of like map out our facilities, but all of that information needed to go back into Cartograph, which is our asset management system. And there was only, while there are other systems that will do this type of mapping, that was the only existing company that could integrate into Cartograph.
Then that would be a sole source.
So that would be a single source.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So another example this one is the one that I keep in mind. It helps me. Some of our pools have older equipment, and so we need to buy one of the chlorine. The form in which we purchase the chlorine for several of our pools, there is only one company that sells it, because there's only one company essentially that continues to sell an older type of equipment, something that's set up for an older type of equipment. There's certainly no patent on chlorine, right? But there is only one company that we can buy it in the form that works with our pool systems. That's a single source. Mm-hmm. Whereas a sole source would be, a proprietary tool or technology that, as a result of a patent, only one company sells.
Gotcha. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Second round, starting with Councilwoman Gross and Councilman Charlin and Councilman Coghill.
So I reacted off camera to the controller saying that she didn't think that City Council should throw out all of its procurement rules in expending ARPA dollars. And I just wanted to clarify, right, and allow you to clarify that statement. You are not concerned that we have done so, having expended
Sorry,
and
no, I
committed
wasn't
now
implying
some
that.
320 out of the $335 million to date.
Nope.
Thank you. That's all I needed.
Thank you. Councilman Charlin?
Thank you. I just had a couple follow-up questions as we were having a little more discussion there. So in terms of the selection committee, again, I think it's something I'm interested in. Is that made public at any point, through a right to know or anything like that? Do we ever find out who's on the selection committee? Could council find that out if that exists in like a financial impact statement or something, you know?
I believe it's in the fiscal impact statement. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But as far as law's guidance that is not subject to right to know. So, and it kind of also, just as general practice, protects our employees from getting all these vendors calling them and saying, oh, you're on the selection committee. You know, if they don't know who's on the selection committee, that also helps keep our like blackout period and communication period of that, you know, they're not contacting city employees. If they don't know who's voting, they're not out there trying to persuade votes. Or, you know, and we've had vendors too that they call council offices and, you know,
Yeah.
many of you say, hey, we have to vote on this. You can't talk to me. You know, they're trying to.
I think just to clarify that, and this was a recent change. So the rationale for not sharing that information during the selection process is exactly as Jen has stated, to ensure that respondents don't try to go out of the standard procedures to then reach out directly to review committee members. We have relatively recently implemented consistency in listing the review committee members in the fiscal impact statements. That was done, but I don't believe with total consistency in the past. We've been rolling, we have made it a directive to ensure that members of the selection committee are listed in the fiscal impact statement when the authorization is sought from council. That is after the selection committee has made a determination, so it doesn't expose us to the risk of those extracurricular communications at that point.
Okay. So,
You know, I'm going to have a follow-up to that. Go ahead.
yeah, well, two more things that I wanted to bring up. So I'm looking at the waiver for Matrix, and there is you do mention litigation as a reason here, but you also do mention that it's a sole source contract. It says that right here on there, which we know now that Matrix was not a sole source entity.
Yeah, I can't recall or speak to the form itself, other than I don't dispute what you're saying. The intention of engaging them via a waiver was the potential for litigation, and specifically the findings of the study being relevant to the arbitration process that we anticipated was likely at that stage in those negotiations.
I understand that, but they were brought in to prepare us for litigation because we thought that the police contract was going to go to arbitration. I understand that. They also provided a product for us.
It was that product that we anticipated would be part of the evidence entered in an arbitration proceeding.
Okay. But they aren't a sole source, which again, you know, I think should raise all of our concerns here that if you're saying they're a sole source, you're listing on the waiver that they're a sole source, but we know that they're not. What other situations are happening where we have you listing that they're a sole source on the waiver and then we find out that they're not?
Being the person that did a lot of the research on this, and that we were initially trying to engage somebody before we decided if we needed to do an RFP, or was there, you know, we did a lot of research trying to find other companies that could do this work and in the time frame that we needed it, and they were the only ones that I could find through my research. And we also, even though at the time we were not required to, we also consulted Solicitor Kubiak, who helped us come to these same conclusions. So law was, you know, also involved in, you know, we did a lot of research, and there was a couple firms that we even had called, and even though they kind of said that they could, when you talk to them, they actually couldn't do what we needed them to do.
So, I mean, I believe that hadn't we already entered into contract previously with, is the Association of Police Chiefs, or there's an organization named something similar to that would also perform work like this? Hadn't we already done that previously?
No, I can't answer that.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't think we did.
If it was before my time, so I'm not familiar.
Okay. And then count. she's my next question doesn't make a whole lot of sense asking to an empty chair. I'll defer to whoever else wants to go next.
All right, we'll come back to you, Councilman Coghill.
Okay, thank you. First, Jen, I want to thank you for, we had recently an RFP, and yeah, I find myself like getting calls from the office from people who are, and thank you for directing us, because I have a vote on that, we can't even talk to them about it. So, and I understand that, and I appreciate you kind of looking over that and stopping it before it really happened. So I wasn't quite aware of the rules myself.
No problem. We don't want. I don't want to ever put any of you in a position to get any perception of.
In a position to hurt the person with, responding to the RFP, because they didn't know either. They didn't know the rules and the conduct there. So, so I appreciate your expertise in that and bring that to light for us. We were talking sole and let me just ask this: a waiver is only necessary for a sole source or a single source, correct?
There are about 14 different categories.
Is there? Okay,
yes.
But they're certainly needed for those two categories.
They're absolutely needed for those two categories. I can rattle off some other
ones
if you're interested,
but not 12 of them, but
no. Things statutorily dictated, settlements, things directed by a grant, intergovernmental cooperation agreements.
Got it. Okay, the one things I guess we're most familiar with are the single and the sole source, because they're the ones that come up in conversation. Councilman Charlin asked about the selection committee. I think it's a good idea not to make that public, of course, because like they try to lobby me, they'll try to, they'll lobby them. If they find out they live down the block, the next thing you know, they're getting a box of candy and a little nice note, Maybe not even referring to the actual contract, but, so I think that's important. But how many people are on the selection committee? Can I ask you that?
It varies.
Okay.
Usually about 5.
Okay.
But as I mentioned before, if it's a citywide, like the enterprise content management, there's probably 30 people that are looking at those proposals because they're looking at it from the needs of their department. Sure. We're trying to make a decision for what's the best for the city at whole, what's going to work most for everybody. But everybody, all departments have documents that they need to store and route, and have different needs, different security restrictions, privacy restrictions. So there are quite a few people, including CPRB representation and things like that, who would use that system. That everybody needs their voice to make sure that we're buying something that's going to suit our needs.
Right. And who selects the selection committee? Do we know?
The using department or departments. So. The simplest example is an RFP for something that is only going to be used by a single department. Right. In that instance, then the director of that department will identify the staff whose expertise is necessary to review the proposals. 4 to 5 people are then assigned that task. The director may be one of them, or they may choose not to be on it for any number of reasons.
So they're always city employees?
Yes.
Okay.
In an instance like the citywide content management system, where many and potentially all departments have expertise that needs to be contributed, then OMB plays a coordinating role in making sure that all of the potential users are being thought of and invited to participate. But ultimately, still, it is the IMP director who selects the IMP representative, the DPW director who selects the DPW representative, et cetera.
Makes sense. You want people that are familiar with the field and, as to what they're purchasing or what the RFP is offering.
We work to make sure that no perspective that might be important is missed.
Understood.
But we don't hand select the individuals.
Got it. Understood. Okay. The Juneteenth RFP, was Bounce the cheapest?
It was one, all three respondents were responding to a request that identified the same amount of money.
Right.
They all would have gotten the same amount.
Okay,
So that
there was
one
no
was,
lowest bidder because there was only one fixed price.
that's true. Now, in RFPs, we're not bound to select the lowest price. Low bids are a different type of contract, the IFB, invitation for bid.
Understood.
We don't, there are both qualitative and quantitative considerations in RFPs, and it's not uncommon to select. I can't think of an instance where the highest bidder has been selected, but sometimes the second lowest bidder is selected because of something else about their proposal, for example.
Got it.
But in that case,
in this case, it didn't matter.
Doesn't
Right.
apply.
Got it. Understood. And the okay, so and bounce has been paid.
Correct, because the legislation authorizing the contract passed, a contract was executed, and so then payment was made.
Right. And I know our council president is working on trying to come up with a solution where we could pay, I feel, our promise to the Poise Foundation. Did it not? I know we didn't have a signed contract with them with the $125,000, even though I feel like we committed to it. But being that we had a verbal commitment, does that not, exclude them from the sole source? Because we had that before you opened it up for a bid for anybody.
I would.
We're waiting to hear back.
Well, the resolution of this question is forthcoming from review of all the documentation. I would just return to it would have been clear. It was, in fact, was clear to everyone involved. Right. At the point at which a contract for 1 year was entered into and one payment was made, right, that there was no contract and thus no obligation or no commitment of future funds, and that there would be an RFP process in which they participated. So I believe that our handling of the situation is above board, both to the letter of the law and generally as reputable conduct of business. Mm-hmm. But we're still resolving the outstanding final question.
Yeah, and I guess we'll let the attorneys try to figure that out, and hopefully we get that sooner than later. I'll tell you that, me personally, it really bothers me that they have not been paid, but Bounce has been paid. I feel we committed that money to them, but that's neither here nor there at this point. I just want to make sure they get paid, okay, one way or the other. I don't care how we do it, to be honest with you. I know we have to walk the legal lines in order to do so. I hope we can get a fast response, and we can put an end to this. I really do. I just feel like I don't take it personally, because it's not personally for me, but I feel like, when I owe somebody money, I want to pay them. I feel that way in this case too.
Again, I'm not disagreeing with your perspective. The city owes someone money at the point at which we sign a contract to pay them, and we've not done that.
I know that. But the word is as good as a contract for me, and I feel like we gave them that at the time. So, okay, so I'm really hoping that we could get a swift resolution to that. Controller, did you want to add anything to that conversation?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now that's it for me. Thank you for being here and helping clear these issues up if we achieve that.
Thank you
for me, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Charlin?
No, I'm good.
You good? All right. Councilwoman Smith?
Oh, I'm done.
Councilwoman Warwick?
Oh, I'm going. I see her page.
Yes. I just want to say, I really just want to quickly just commend everybody here at the table. Members for asking these questions, for the controller's office for doing the report, and and for OMB for coming and really providing what I think have been abundantly thorough answers to all of our questions, right? Really clarifying everything. I know I understand a lot more since having had this, this post agenda. So, I appreciate everyone coming together like this. And I do want to underscore, for, I know sometimes it can feel perhaps like we're, city governments of past, not just Pittsburgh, but everywhere, right? Like we know that like graft corruption, like, you know, sweetheart deals, like this type of stuff in decades past is like rampant, right? Everywhere. And that's, and people, you know, and that is sort of where the distrust of government comes, you know, comes from. And it's justified. But at the same time, so that's why it's very heartening to see, right, to see people working together, asking questions, giving good answers, being clear and transparent and open to adjustment. You know, unfortunately, you know, good government is incredibly boring. It's very dull. Nobody wants to hear about, you know, about how you know how much, you know, how carefully we're going through step by step on all these processes, and you know, you know, sadly in this world, like conspiracy and innuendo and whatnot is what gets the clicks. But at the end of the day, it's as we've seen on a much larger scale recently, it's harmful to the public, right? It's harmful to public good. So, you know, I hope that what comes out of this, I hope that, you know, I know that people don't necessarily watch these post agendas, but, you know, for those who read about this or whatever, I really do hope that the meat of what we've talked about, which is, you know, this very detailed procurement process and you know, painstaking process and, you know, all these different things that we look at, I hope that does come through. It's certainly come through for me. So thank you to the controller and OMB and everyone else.
I want to thank council for requesting that the controller prepare this report and then having today's hearing so that we could talk about it. I think, if nothing else, it's been a valuable opportunity for us to share some of that information and build a common understanding of what procedures are in place now, where we can, I think, all agree on areas for improvement, but mostly just to sort of come to, you know, level set around what we are doing. So thank you.
Thank you. One question for me. Your second recommendation, Madam Controller, was council may seek to look into how to retain requisite confidentiality provisions while having access to review proposals prior to approval. Why the recommendation?
Just so you know, when you're voting on a contract, you've seen copies of the RFPs, that the responses, once a committee votes on, or the committee itself votes, the council would have access to that information, seemingly in an executive session. I guess that would have to happen, but that you would have access to that before voting on it. So the council, and it goes along with the waiver process, but we do not have access to that. I don't have access to the RFP before the contract is executed. So that review is incumbent upon council to request if they so desire it. So that was a recommendation from our office because of the way the contracting process works, which I'm not suggesting we change. It's a point of clarification that, you know, we don't review the RFP prior to contract execution. So if there were questions that council had about that RFP, you all would be able to request from procurement copies or conversation with OMB and the selection committee.
Thank you. And Director Pollock, I don't remember what your response on the screen was to that. Can you tell me what your response was?
That we would happily, you know, look at what further information could be provided. I suggested in our response through the fiscal impact statement to provide additional detail where that is possible while maintaining the necessary confidentiality protections. I think it's worth noting that in that RFPs, we've talked about this a couple times, right? That you know, that doesn't. There are a lot of things that does not include, right? Things that we're buying based on price, where the low bid is we're required to select the low bid. Those are IFBs, right? In the case of RFPs, we're not making it's a qualitative selection based on the respondents, what they included in their proposal, not just the cost or any one measurable factor. So when we submit a request to enter a contract based on a selection, it's really the professional recommendation of the selection committee that this was the best response. it's somewhat of an apples and oranges comparison at that point to look at the other responses. But we do want to we are perfectly willing to ensure that council knows who the other respondents were and as much information as we can share while maintaining the necessary confidentiality.
Okay. That's something I would like to pursue. As you're well, excuse me, as you're well aware, there's always been this sort of tension between council having to vote an awarded contract up or down, while members also want to say, well, I want to see what the other respondents have, and trying to figure out where those two tension points meet, I think is of interest to the majority of council, so that they are indeed, in council's mind, having the most informed vote possible, right? So I think that's something we can collectively work on. The second point I'll make, and we didn't go into this today, and I think the appropriate people aren't necessarily here, but there has been a lot of conversation around sort of lowest bid, and the administration knows this. I've always had an interest in, to the extent possible, moving away from simply lowest bid to, I can't remember my own wording at this point. Lowest responsible. Not lowest responsible.
Best value.
Best value.
Thank you.
Is what you've
and I've
mentioned
always
to me
had
previously.
an interest of moving towards best value. And just the easiest example being, we need pens, and the lowest responsible bidder says, I can give it to me for $10, and that lowest responsible bidder happens to be in Westmoreland County. Kahari's sister has a company that says, well, I can give them to you for $11, but her company's in Homewood. I'd rather give her the $11 contract, right? Because there's a better value for that. And I'm just saying this out loud. Felicity, Deputy Williams, excuse me, as well as Jesse in the law department have really been digging into this. And I've had numerous conversations with them. Jesse has done a lot of sort of education for me around why that can be tricky at times. And with all that being said, I do know the administration is actually digging into this and doing a lot of work on the front end of bidding to get people into the room, to better understand the bidding, to better sort of help them on the front end get to more minority local contracts, things of that nature. And so feel free to respond if you want to, but at another time, I think it'll be worth us coming back around the table to have a fuller conversation about that whole process and how we're sort of doing RFPing and bidding on the front end to get more and more local contractors into our queue.
I would just to that end note that the legal standard is actually not lowest bid. It is lowest responsible bid, and both there is responsive and responsible in that context are defined terms with specific legal meaning that do provide the opportunity to, it's not take into account those other considerations in the same way best value does, but to judge a proposal, determine whether it is either not responsive or not responsible prior to looking at cost, and disqualify responses that do not fully answer the question, right, or are not responsible for reasons that are determined other than cost, and then thus not entertain those bids. So that's a step toward perhaps what you're interested in, Councilman. For example, if a response does not include the required MWDBE participation plan, it would then be a non-responsive bid, even if, well, we would never know if it was the lowest bid because we wouldn't open it, right? And in that way, we can achieve some of those objectives without running afoul of the present legal standard as we, and that is in fact something we're implementing now, as we then look at the question of a change in standard to best value. And you yourself pointed out that Deputy Solicitor Exilis is perhaps our most knowledgeable resource on that topic, and it is a very complicated question. So I don't think that there are immediate changes or answers forthcoming there, but certainly something we're continuing to pursue. In the interim, ensuring that we are upholding the standard of lowest responsible bid can help achieve some of the same goals.
Thank you. Better said than I, but yes, they've been walking me through that entire process.
I was just going to say, at your request, Council President Lavelle introduced a bill in the last month and a half, I think, asking the controller's office to evaluate MWDBE businesses.
Yes.
Which we have not started in full disclosure, but we will meet with you to figure out what exactly your objectives are, and then what we can evaluate based on that. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's not quite underway yet, but it will be soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Cargill?
Yeah, please. Real quick, I just wanted to really dovetail off what you said. I wholeheartedly agree with you. First of all, keeping the money local, if we can, and if it costs a little bit more, well, we kind of get it back and come back into the economy. We don't see it. You don't see it at this table, but you got to know that Kahari's sister, does she really own a...
No, I just haven't
Kahari's not on the selection. Kahari's not on the selection committee.
Okay. So I wholeheartedly agree with that, and not always the lowest price, if we're buying the same, if it's a product, if it's the same product that they're delivering, fine, lowest price. If we know we're getting the same product from, but when we're talking about a service or a professional service, well, very rarely when I'm taking bid or getting bids on a project around the house or my vehicle, you name it, very rarely do I go with the lowest bid. Not because I don't trust them. I just, I just go with what I feel is the best qualified. Are we required to have that language? Is that our language in there? Like lowest responsible bidder, or is that?
This is the difference between RFPs on the one hand and invitations for bid on the other hand.
Right.
So the distinction you just drew is essentially exactly where that line is drawn for us. Professional services, engineering, architecture, like things where the differences between the product itself are as important as price. Those go through RFP, and the review committee is weighing all of those factors when making a selection, both price, quality, composition of team, expertise. So that's one. That's like you looking at bids on your car and weighing both the price and the skill of the mechanic at the same time.
Right, sure.
IFB is when we're really commodities, right? It's this. If we have a spec for rock salt.
Yeah.
We have 5 different companies that will give us the exact same salt.
Right.
We select the one that provides the best price.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, I think, what the best opportunity and flexibility of time for the department to do the appropriate compiling of information so that they can craft an RFP that is listing certain criteria that they know what the market has to offer, and then they can evaluate based on what kind of product, whatever project details are included, any kind of timelines, and then hopefully a cost that you can get it as close to apples, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like the whole process to go, and it sounds like it does in many ways, as to what we're doing on home repair ourselves. Yeah. So.
Cool. I believe we've exhausted.
I believe I'm exhausted.
Today's post agenda. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.